Hey guys, it's Ofo
And Kelly Green here. Hey.
with the WIL Take Ownership podcast, where it's all about taking ownership of your mental, your economics, and your community. We're joined today by the founders of CRWN Magazine, Nkrumah and Lindsey.
What's poppin'?
Hello.
Awesome. I appreciate you guys joining us today. We're going to have a dope conversation ahead of us. Actually, do you guys want to introduce yourselves, like give a little bit of background? Because I know I wanted to bring it in by introducing you guys as co-founders of CRWN. But, you know, you guys had lives before, and I want to know how y'all got here. Yeah.
Nkrumah loves to introduce himself. I'll let you go first.
Well, I'm going to tell you just like this. I did a lot of stuff before. I creative directed in a lot of places. There's a lot of logos on my resume, but none of them matters more than the one that I own, CRWN. So the best background to have on me is that I'm the people's creative director.
That's what it is.
Such an Nkrumah response. I'm Lindsey Day. I mean, I feel very similar. CRWN is where we at. I think it's like the sum of all of the experiences of my life in a strange way, whether it's women's empowerment or, all of the different kind of hats that we wear as the founders of CRWN.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely they come into play. Yeah. Like they pulling from my experience for sure all the time.
So this is gonna sound mad funny. So before y'all came, because we have our prep meetings, right? I was literally like, I was talking to Kelly and Franz, and I was like, when you talk to Lindsey and Nkrumah, I was like, Lindsey's more like from her experiences, she gonna tell you her story. I said Nkrumah's more like societally, like what's going on. And y'all both gave those answers.
That's hilarious. Well, at least we're consistent.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a good way to start. How do you guys start CRWN Magazine? How did it come about?
You want to tell us?
Yeah, just FYI, I have a problem with my headphones. But the magazine was just born out of a conversation. Like I was in town and I stopped in to visit Lindsey in Brooklyn, and we were just talking about all of the energy that there was on YouTube around the natural hair movement, and we're talking about the fact that like every other week I was discovering like a different woman looking into her laptop, talking about her hair and what she does with it, and she would have 100,000, 75,000, 400,000 subscribers on YouTube, and that made me go, wait a minute, that represents scale that is a cultural phenomenon.
And when was that, by the way? Like when were you capturing that energy?
2014.
Dope.
2015. And because of the the transparency of social media, I was able to identify a major shift in culture. And so we were talking and trying to figure out like how could we participate in this. And it just so happened that all of our careers up until that point and all of our skill sets put us in a perfect position to create this magazine that would formalize and cement the cultural shift that these black women had made happen by themselves.
Right. And I think while Nkrumah had a lot of the insights from like the digital space and like just being very observant about culture, and this is kind of like one of the things that makes that's part of his genius. I think coupled with both of our personal experiences and having, watched my mom go through the big chop experience, and all of my friends, we had all transitioned from wearing our hair straight to, natural hair, and kind of looked up and I'm like, I live in Brooklyn and all of my friends have natural hair. Yeah. And it's just like, this is for sure a thing outside of just something that we're seeing far away. It's like, this is my life. So it really hit home. And I was, I would say, very intimately connected to the challenges, to the external and internal challenges that you face when you make such a drastic change when it comes to like transitioning to natural hair or whatever the case may be. So we thought that would be a really cool phenomenon and starting point to a conversation about the larger things around identity, around, power and influence, around self-love, a lot of the conversations that we've been able to have now through CRWN.
Dope. Really dope stuff. I know you're going to ask, you were intrigued by the name.
I am. And how that name came about, CRWN, spelling of it and everything.
Well, it's interesting. So the first conversation that we had, we came up with the name and we came up with 14 monetization models on the first conversation.
That's love.
But we dismissed the name.
We didn't trust it.
Yeah. And so we went through this whole elaborate exercise. And
Wait. Throw us some of the names.
Oh, no. Don't tell him. Don't tell him.
Well, it might have been Crown with a K.
Okay.
Spelled Kroun, but that's just...
What was it? Was it Cardi B? Like the K?
Culture?
Yeah.
Right.
The K.
Yeah.
And it was very close to being called Good Hair and...
No.
I'm so happy. I'm so happy.
Why would you tell them that?
No, that's what we're here for. Learning the real story.
Leave that back there.
That's a Crown Mag fact though for you.
Yeah, I don't think we ever told anyone.
Good hair. That's funny.
Everybody.
Well, I'm glad you asked that, then. That's good stuff.
That's funny.
But the name is important. Names are important.
Yes.
Because a name is a signal to let you know what's inside, and the signal that we wanted to send was is reinforcing the idea that like your hair in its natural state is your crown and glory, but then also it's the fact that part of the reason why we wanted to create this magazine was to engage Black women in higher thought.
Mm-hmm.
And so the idea that it's like we're speaking to your crown. Everything on TV, everything on the radio, most of the stuff, half of the stuff you see on social media is speaking to your lower self.
Mm-hmm.
We wanted to produce something that addressed, all these Black women with all this education. It's like every Black woman I know has real stuff on her mind, is world traveled, multiple degrees, and it's like if you look at the media that's offered to Black women, it doesn't necessarily reflect the sophistication that today's Black woman has. And so we had to create Crown to address that because there was a hole in the market.
That's dope. That's dope because we were talking about it earlier, but I was saying how like my cousin actually had said this to me. He was like, when you think about black hair is the only hair that defies gravity, right? That stands up and stands out, right? So when I think about using the word crown to depict your brand, depict really culture, you're right. Mad things fit under that spectrum where you can touch on many things about the community and everything like that. So we, even with our podcast, we talk about how, we talk about the mental, the economics, the community, but really, and Franz, you put it best earlier, it's like, it's really just an extension of the conversations you would be having, everywhere, anywhere, like in your neighborhood, at the barbershop, in the office, right? So it's cool to be able to bring that stuff on the airways so we could talk about that kind of stuff the same way you guys bring it to the magazine covers and also through social media. So that's good stuff. You guys, what dictates the things you guys discuss, right? So when you think about, you open up Crown Magazine, it could be about financial literacy, the issue that's coming out now, right? Like you guys take on many different topics that are far beyond hair, right? Visually, aesthetically, touch on it's beautiful, right? It's but then you cover all those things. So what actually inspires you guys to cover the topics you guys do?
Well, each issue has a theme, and we lay that out pretty early on, I would say, in the process. After the first issue, I think the rest kind of followed very organically, and we agreed upon them very that's it. That'll be good. I think between that, so our first issue was the manifesto, then it was the love issue, money and power, and then the fourth will be freedom.
Gotcha.
So that was laid out very early on. Also, everything that we create is governed by our brand pillars, which are sisterhood, knowledge of self, self-love, authenticity, and ownership, which you guys can relate to. So that governs like our editorial map off top. It has to fit within those themes. So typically when we lay out an issue, we start with we say 35 pieces, which usually grows to like 80 pieces. And then we have to shrink it from there. And then the second issue did grow as compared to the first issue. But we kind of start with a roadmap of, we have a breakdown of the types of content that we want to touch that fall within those brand pillars. And then it's a matter of, okay, within this theme of love or of money and power, what is the most necessary thing to touch on. And that morphs, and a lot of it happens very organically. Like, you know, we just happened to hop on a bus, not on a bus, on a train to Baltimore last week and connected with some really dope people. And now they're going to write in the next issue, you know? So those types of things happen all the time, particularly when we already have the editorial map laid out and it's like, oh, we need that. You please help us, like, you know, give us your wisdom, give us your insights. So that's a lot of how, I mean, we definitely have a very like clear vision, but then a lot of the filling in of that is an organic activity. But then of course we along the way have built a community of creatives and writers that were like, ooh, Chelsea would be great for that. We got to hit her up, you know, or whoever the case, you know, whatever the case may be.
It's a lot of times it's not about what, it's about who.
Right.
So we built this framework, and then we live and we engage with the dynamic people around us, and the who just falls in place. It just becomes obvious, like, oh wow, you have to be in a magazine. Like, this is the biggest part or the biggest function of Crown is as platform, really, to bring light to, for the most part, the Black women that are doing amazing things. And it's a celebration of them, and it's also, you know, it's a place where they can be celebrated and their work can be respected. You know?
Yeah, very much. We focus on depth versus, like, there's a lot of conversations about representation and so thankful to be represented. And it's like, we have to push beyond just like shallow face value representation. And like, but when you open it, do you see anything of depth about said person? And is it new? Is it fresh? Is it done with care? Do the publishers care about the people that they're talking to? Are they even talking to you?
Right.
Or are they talking about you to someone?
Sure.
You know, and so that is another part of why we felt so strongly about creating Crown, you know, 4 years ago or whenever, but then still to this day, you see a lot more faces on covers or, you know, digital covers as they like to do too. But then where's the story? What do I, you know, and if there is a story, a lot of times you'll find that they're decoding or demystifying some sort of Black experience for an other. And we ain't about that.
That's cool. And, you know, it seems like I read, you touched on this a little bit earlier, Lindsey, about how we both have similarities in taking ownership. The podcast with the mental economics community, you were taking ownership of, like, the standard of Black women and their beauty. And it sounds like you said, it's not just the aesthetic beauty that you see. It's like, who are we bringing into this magazine to continue to have a narrative of Black women where it's power and not just, you know, loud power, like we just talking to talk, but it's like, okay, what can I share here? Am I inspiring someone? Am I empowering someone? Am I teaching someone? You know, like, how are we going to contribute to the community? And like, I admire that so much. I think it's so dope for you to like continue to do that. And I'm also wondering like how you do that search. I'm just personally like curious, like how,
in what way? What do you
how
mean?
you like find like the people that you're gonna include in the magazine. Do you have like a team contributing to, or dedicated rather, to that?
Yeah, I mean, we've scrapped it out a lot in the past years. We are now building our team. Like, we just brought on a managing editor.
Nice.
So that,
Congrats.
yeah, thank
awesome.
you.
Congrats.
Yeah, so just having hands that are tending to the fire, because as you guys know, you know, a lot of times people see the face of a company, but they don't understand like how you make money and like what all of the moving parts are behind the scenes when you're like running around or sitting on your couch or whatever it is. It's not so glamorous. But yeah, so we're definitely growing the editorial team, but a lot of it just happens very, again, organically. And it's just like, we know we want to talk about something, you know, reparations. Nkrumah will be like, oh, such and such, you know, professor, blah, 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 and break it down, and then we'll reach out, you know. But another thing could just be scrolling on Instagram or going into our database of, you know, people contribute, you know, crownmag.com/contribute. But people apply to contribute all the time, so pulling from, it's a mix of all of those things, you know.
It really is about being a part of the culture.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, you can't do what we do unless you're a part of the culture.
Right.
And that's part of our competitive advantage. That's part of our competitive advantage. Like there's a big interest in putting Black women on the cover of magazines now that didn't exist when we started. But like Lindsey said, there's no depth to that representation, and the reason why they can't give you that depth is because they're not a part of the culture. They're just trying to profit off of it and just fetishizing over Blackness. And so we're able to catch things as they fall out of the sky, as they happen, as they emerge, because we're just...
It's our people.
Yeah.
You know? And not to be, I guess it's kind of funny, but has there ever been a moment where you guys are like, all right, so I have someone in particular in mind for a certain piece? You reach out to them, they're like, yeah, I'm in. They submit it back, and you're like, yo, like, this isn't
All
what
the
we had in
time.
mind.
Ain't it?
All the time.
What happens then? Like, do you guys let them know in advance? Like, there's still a chance this might not run. Like, how does that end up? Or do you really work with them till it's like
we've had to create process to protect people's feelings and also protect our time.
Yeah.
So no one knows if they made the magazine or not until we go to press. Like the magazine is alive. It's a work in progress until the morning we send it to the press.
Actually. I mean, and we had to learn that really, like by going through it. The first time, it's like you're like, oh, this is great. You know, you see it, but you don't publish until a little bit later, and you didn't communicate properly, whatever. And this is great. Was interpreted as it's running, it's getting published, and she loved it, and then you're like, oh wait, the creative didn't work out for whatever reason. The shoot that we did, we did a shoot for locks of like 10 women with locks and all this stuff, just didn't work out. It didn't look right, and so you can't just run blank words in certain cases, or you can't sacrifice the aesthetic for. You know what I'm saying? It has to make sense. So we definitely, that first issue, I think, was the hardest, because it was like, he was just like, nah, it ain't gonna make it. And I'm like, but wait, but this and but that,
That's real,
and
though.
so you just have to really approach it. It's a business, and you have to manage expectations for sure. And like Nkrumah said, process definitely helps with that.
And I didn't realize that a lot of magazines run that way. Like, so a friend of mine, Ren Brown, just wrote the piece on Spike Lee in Time Magazine, right? And apparently Spike's team was calling them the morning of, like, hey, are we going to be on the cover or not? Like, it wasn't, this team had no idea. And what's happened several times is they found themselves like, yeah, you're going to be on the cover most likely. And then something crazy happens with Trump that week, and he makes the cover as a result.
Oh my
gosh.
We've never done nobody like that.
Yeah.
but
because they can't give a full guarantee ever. It's more like a most likely you will, but we don't know where society's going type of thing. So
the only thing for us that's fixed is the cover. And it's because of how we do it. It's like, we don't just pick someone and slap them on the cover. We really decide about, who represents the feeling of what we're trying to get across, and also who is having a moment right now that needs to be celebrated. And then from the time that we engage that person to be on the cover, and from the time that we announce the cover, it's a continuous back and forth between our platform and them, and there's this sort of like synergy and relationship that's built in the public. Relationship that's built in the public, so that by the time the magazine actually hits the street, like, they're comfortable, or people are accustomed to seeing us next to the person or persons on the cover. And so in that way, we're building a family, so to say. The women who've been on the cover of Crown Magazine all have very powerful audiences and communities in their own right. And now they're together by the fact that they have all been on the cover of Crown.
Yeah.
That's real. That is a family. How has it been, like, entering this space and maintaining your presence in it? Especially as, like a Black-owned company but being successful in having Black women on the cover and making sure it's, in depth and not just faces, and sharing all these stories. I
mean, hard. Very, 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 very hard. It's the grind of my life. Like, there's no real sugarcoating it. Like, it is not, it is very, like when you're creating something because there's a void, it's not like the path just lays out in front of you. It's like, yeah, this is a great idea. Like from day one, people thought it was a terrible idea. Like my mom thought it was a terrible idea. Our first partner, that potential partner, was like, print is dead. You know what I mean?
Right.
So it was just like shots at every point along the way, and we're creating a print product, and we're creating a print product for Black women who traditionally people just assume that we don't like nice things for whatever reason, and that they shouldn't invest in anything aesthetically, quality wise, paper, like, so it's just like, even just doing the things that we think is just simple, it must be done, like give a magazine with actual content in it. Have it feel nice. Have it be something that you want to like show to somebody.
Right.
You know, that all of that is just like, oh, why would you do that? You know, but then you see that there's this resurgence of print happening, and there's, you know, I mean, there's been the Kim Folks, and there's all of these magazines that are beautiful. They're just never really geared toward us.
Right.
And so it's hard, but it's like, if not us, who?
That's right.
Right.
You know,
Yes.
like somebody got to do it.
But do you find, and this is a collective question, like, do you guys? I feel like in that same vein, what we see is then like things that are created for niche audiences can still be beautiful and strong, or whatever. But then it's like the assumption that it has to stay niche, when it's like no, like because the way people would describe what you guys do is because it's so clean and so fresh, it's like boutique, like it would be for a special audience, but in reality it speaks to so many people.
It's universal.
So I think what we're seeing is like, and we see it in our space too, is like there's the things that everybody's done historically that, you know, because of I think how money enters the fake picture, they've all kind of started copying the same things. And so what ends up being your power is that you come into it boldly, something that would normally be niche, though you say, nah, why not go after everybody? If this audience will respond to it, I'm sure many people will too, right? And so you start creating and staying true to those core tenets that you guys have, right? Those core pillars. And then you realize that many people also are like, oh, that is important.
It's running your race.
You create your own market in doing that, right? Like, running your own
I mean,
race.
like, we got a wholesale order from South Africa yesterday. We didn't market to South Africa, but it's like, duh.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
yeah.
It's like, it's a universal conversation.
Absolutely.
Like, this is
And
not
white women love
a
the
niche.
magazine.
Yeah,
So,
that's true too.
but we did not make it with them in mind. We
Right.
made it
Right,
specifically for Black women, in America.
Right.
But because and it's interesting, we just happen to choose the target audience that is the most influential audience in the world. Black women
women
drive
are,
culture.
absolutely.
Black women have command over household spending. Like, this is the most important audience in media, period.
Yeah.
Yep.
No, that's real. That's real. So there was two things. One thing you had mentioned earlier, Lindsey was featured in our Take Ownership series before we were a podcast. It's crazy. 2 years ago. And you had mentioned this whole concept of like, you can't be what you can't see, right? And so you see in the magazine, there's so much dedication to highlighting, like you guys said, Black women that are doing amazing things, so other people can kind of follow those footsteps, or at least see it can be done. What have you guys seen, like the outreach like, or the pickup like with young women, like high schoolers, college age women? Like, has it been really strong, or are you guys doing more in those spaces?
I don't know if you want to jump in.
That's
like I've been talking a
interesting.
lot.
So like when we were sort of figuring out like who exactly we're going to target and making the choices for what our primary audience was going to be, the magazine skewed a little bit older, but we made the decision that the younger women, 18 to say 24, who were really interested in the magazine, they would be the ones that more so had it together, and that it would be aspirational for them in the sense that they want to be like their older sister or their youngest aunt that really got her thing together.
Right.
So in that regard, the young part of our audience is like, I think these are going to be the people who run the world in the future.
For sure. For sure. And I think by targeting that like auntie, young auntie vibe, we'll see on social media, the woman sitting with her niece between her legs doing her hair, holding crown, those types of moments, which are really, really cool, because I think by targeting a woman who's, still young, but like approaching 30s, maybe in her 30s, you get kind of her grandma or her mom, her grandma, perhaps her niece, her daughter when she comes of age. So it was a strategic decision to focus in that way. But that being said, we also, we love the kids. We've spoken at high schools and done that kind of thing too. So we love that.
That's great.
I love
That's
it.
great.
You like fixing the crowns of the little kids out there. And you know what? Speaking of that, I'm curious, Lindsey. Like, you have an important message about fixing crowns in general. Like, I've seen that on social media a few times. What examples do you have of you fixing other women's crowns? Or are they coming in and fixing yours? Like, help.
I don't know if I've used those words exactly. I've definitely seen. I think we got to fix our own crowns at the end of the day. I think I think it's a kind of a self-love conversation and that knowledge of self. I think that's where we can help each other. And I think for me, crown is a representation of, it is meant to be a reflection of our beauty. So like, if you're going through one of those moments, hopefully you can open Crown Magazine and like see whether it's like I'm going through a big chop or whether I'm, trying to find a job or whether I'm, starting my health and wellness journey, or, struggling, giving birth or whatever. You should be able to go in here and be like, oh, I have a community, I have a family, I'm not alone in this, and I think there's so much power in even coming back to the magazine. Like, I don't write everything, so it's like there's certain pieces, like Latham Thomas wrote this piece on the womb, and it's like, I swear she has me in tears more than once. Every time I go back to it, I take something different from it. I haven't even had kids yet, but it's more about what the womb represents as a woman, and it's not attached to just giving birth, for example. Those moments, and it's like, I never would have thought of this. Like, who, but being able to kind of curate those moments and that genius from these different women, I think it makes it so that it's not about like me doing anything for someone. It's more about like, this is you. Like, look at you and feel yourself, because this is a collective. This is all of us, And so if you look at your sister and feel that she's beautiful, how could you not see the same in yourself?
Right.
You kind of jumped. So I was going to ask that question, actually. Like, what was the piece that spoke to y'all? But that made me think, though. So I remember, Crown Magazine and Who's Your Landlord are in the same building in Chelsea, Manhattan. So we oftentimes find ourselves in deep conversations, like randomly, pretty often. But one time I was talking to you, Nkrumah, and we were talking about like posting stuff on Instagram. And you look at me like, yo, what are you talking about? But I remember, so I find myself in moments asking, what would Nkrumah do? In the sense that,
professor.
Right. I remember you saying to me, you were like, we were talking about Instagram. You were saying to me, if you get those like nerves inside before you press post, you're probably posting the right thing. You know what I'm saying? Because it means like you're making yourself vulnerable. You're testing your own theories, your own thoughts, and you're just seeing what happens. So is that kind of the mindset you guys have going into creating each issue? Like, or do you feel like the womb issue, I guess in context of right now, maybe it's not that wild to speak about, but maybe like 30 years ago you wouldn't dare talk about that, right? Because it felt very private or taboo. So like, how do you guys determine like what message is the right message to push the culture forward, and what's like, that could be interesting, but it's not for right now? Or like, how do you guys determine that editorially?
Man, this is so difficult to talk about because it happens so easy. First of all, it's not hard for us to get consensus. Usually it goes, hey, we should do blah, 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 blah. And then the other person goes, yeah, cool, we should do that. And so the ideas come, like, for us, the creative process, because everything we do is really creative. We even see the way that we architect the editorial map as a creative endeavor. And so all creative process starts with environment and feeling. Create the right environment that will facilitate, the good ideas, and facilitate the good exchange of ideas between the people you're working with. So that's really where it begins. And then there's just a lot of ground to cover. It's like, sometimes I look into the future and I'm wondering how long it's going to take before we run out of things to say or there's not more to say. And by my calculation, it'll be about 8 or 9 years before we're just like, oh, what do we do? What do we say next? Because there's so much to be addressed because this audience hasn't been properly addressed. Like they may put Lupita on the cover of a magazine, but when you open it up, they're not really going to be addressing the dark-skinned girl that really looks up to and admires Lupita. So with that in mind, there's just so much like fundamental basic stuff to cover that is, and which is why we have such scope creep. We're trying to put as much into each issue of the magazine as we possibly can. And in the cases where some things get omitted, really they're just being held till later. Yeah. 'Cause we have a library of like amazing content. We're years deep of content.
Yeah, that's true. You know? That's a good feeling.
Yeah, and I think, you know, like Black women are amazing and like the most educated and all of these things. So it's like most of the time when you get, it's like if you've given the proper intention, what you get back, you're like, oh my gosh, this is great. You know, like, I mean, definitely there's been exceptions along the way, but overall, you know, to your point earlier, but overall, you know, especially when you're selecting people based on their impact in the culture, for example, and the work that they're already doing, you're kind of hedging your bets, and most of the time they're going to come back with like fire, and you're like, I get to publish this. So cool.
That's really...
Where do you guys see the future of crime? Like you talk about 8 or 9 year window. Are y'all still running 8 or 9 years from now? Like what do you guys see for your own future within there?
I mean, this is arguably going to be the most important platform for Black women in the future. Like, if you imagine Black women in the future, and what platform do they stand on? What platform do they aspire to be on? Who do they want to hang out with? It's Crown Magazine. But you know, the culture moves so fast that I don't be liking to talk about like 5-year plan. And if you ask me 18 months, I got you in 18 months. But all I could say is that if we keep our head down and we continue to be sincere and we're committed to creating culture and reflecting the culture, this undoubtedly will be the most important media platform for Black women in the world.
I think it's a great reflection for children too, to see. You mentioned like being in front of your children, your daughter, like doing her hair, like, you know, having that young aunt. And I'm curious if, like, what it would look like to have a space for them too, because as you know, you might have heard in like the media, these little girls who are trying to do something as simple as attend school with their beautiful natural hair are being turned away, are being told it's not part of their dress code.
Suspended.
So being suspended, asked to cut it off. Some kids are sometimes cutting it off. It's like, I wonder almost if you guys have put any thought into like how you can help in that space, or like what people can do in that space to help avoid it.
Well, I mean, really, that just comes down to the elephant in the room, which is that we have to reclaim the education process for our children. Like school, we need a new model for school, and so it's not. There's all kind of band-aids we could put on it, but the fact remains is that we gotta like pull up our trousers and make that happen for our children. We have to create a better alternative for them to be educated in a way that is going to empower them to grow up and address the problems that our people have, versus how they're educated now is they're basically socialized to fall into line.
Absolutely, yeah, I agree.
You know?
Who are a couple that's like, or a few Black women that you guys see now that you're like, in the next 5 years or so, they're going to be leading the way. They're going to be helping, you know, tell our stories. They're going to be helping, you know, influence culture in a positive way that we should be looking to. You can say yourself. So I mean, you don't got it.
I'm like Open Crown Magazine. No. There's a lot.
I mean, if you just look at our last 2 covers, like there's, like, all I can say is we know how to pick them. We know how to pick them. Like all the women that have covered Crown thus far are, since they were on the cover of Crown, have like achieved great things, and that trajectory is sure to continue. So
which is Whitney White, Natural 85 was on her first cover. Morgan DeBon is on our Money and Power issue. And then Dion Ivory and Lauren Ash of Black Her Own Own were on our Love issue cover. And yeah, I mean, all of them just out here getting it in very different ways. Even Dion and Lauren, who work together, they have completely different skill sets. And you know, one is an illustrator and visual artist, the other is a yogi, wellness guru, all of these things. But just such a beautiful picture of Black women coming together, doing their things, but being able to combine that for a greater outcome, more polished outcome, something that's more elevated. Like, if you think about, if for some reason, because I remember they told the story of like meeting, and they met on Instagram, and they're both kind of like, oh wait, she's too cool for me, you know, that like moment. Right. And it's like, what if that they did act like that was the case, and they never connected, or they were doing things in separate worlds and doing similar work that's like not together. It's just like I think the power, particularly of those two, is in how they see we can work together, and it's not a threat to each other to do so. And watching people who do that, and then watching Morgan DeBon grow her empire and acquire companies, and you know, some of the people I respect the most creatively and editorially, like Lily, who wrote our first cover story, is the editor-in-chief of Blavity now. Like, seeing those things happen, it's like all these women is about to be running everything, like everything. So it's really, really, it's an exciting time to be alive, and it's an exciting time to have a publication that can reflect again that energy back.
What's a parting message you would leave with our listeners from each of you? Something that you just feel that comes out and you want to share.
Man, what a prompt.
Don't ask him that.
I mean, listen. Add value. Think about, make an assessment of yourself. What do you have to offer the world? And then separately look at what the world needs, because we get into trouble a lot of times. We have something to offer to the world that maybe the world don't want or need yet, and then you end up having struggle in that way. But if you take assessment of yourself, figure out what you have to offer to the world, and then you look at what is needed, you'll be able to fall right into pocket, and you'll have a much better time at it. It might even be fun. I'm not promising that, because you know everybody wants to have fun with their work, but your grandparents would think that was insane.
Right.
That's true.
I would say also is that you got to have a call to higher ideals. You have to have there has to be more ethics, more morality in how we do business with each other. And that's something that is really important to Crown too, is that everyone who we work with feels like they got a good deal and they can't wait to work with us again. What else can I say? Man, just tell the truth. That is the parting message. Live and die by the truth. Don't add nothing to it. Don't take nothing away. Tell the truth, even when it's difficult. And, you know, that applies in our personal relationships with each other, but it also applies in how we address some of these societal and systemic issues that our people are facing. Is let's not sugarcoat it. Let's get right to what it is so that it can be addressed.
That was good. I'm like, parting words. This is so hard.
No pressure.
There's so many things to say, but then, do you have any realm?
No, honestly, like I think, I'm always like relishing. I
free-for-all.
love that kind of question too myself, because it's just like, there's so many ways you can go with it. I guess if
If you had to choose.
I'm big on the idea of building, right? Like, the truth is one of the core tenets of doing that. Togetherness, working with people, one of the core tenets of doing that. You alluded to that with Morgan and Lily and the Blavity growing, right? Like, we, even the folks you guys feature and stuff, you know, constantly highlighting, championing, you know, ourselves, right? And so I think in order to build effectively, if you have that bond that's created on trust and on the idea of everyone feels like they're really in this to win as a collective versus for themselves, then we'll really see the changes that, you know, we're aspiring to see. And not only will we see those changes, but they will last long and last the test of time, because it's built on foundation versus it just being like you talked about with different magazines. It's like, you know, putting Lupita on the cover just because right now it makes sense and is going to draw a lot of either clicks for them or, you know, or buys for them or whatever. But then when you open it, then it's like speaking about us to someone else versus it really speaking to you, right? So for me, it's just building together. I can't stress that enough. So that's I guess the way I'm always kind of picturing stuff.
Yeah, I guess I would just say know yourself. Like, at the end of the day, I think a lot of people are, you know, or all of us at various points in our lives may have found ourselves like trying to do something that is outside of ourselves and not leaning into those things that make us. Not like, oh, you're special, but like you do have certain skills that other people don't have. So what are those things, and how, again, what he said was adding value, and how can you utilize those things in a collaborative way? Like, that doesn't necessarily mean you're the CEO of a company. It doesn't necessarily mean you're, you know what I mean, running the show all of the time or right now. Like, it might mean, if you know yourself, you need training in a certain area, or you need experience in a certain area. I think we live in a culture where you want to be hot immediately. You want to like be able to look like you're doing something that's dope. But it's like you just went to a networking event at an office. Like, it's fine. Like, you don't have to like pretend like, you know what I mean? Like, I'm in the building, I'm doing it. It's like, just, you know, like,
that's facts.
Be comfortable in your skin first before you're trying to, particularly before you're trying to impose that on others, you know, or inspire others. Because then it's like, what are you inspiring others to do? You know, I think even beyond just like the ego of, oh, I want to be seen. It's like, think about the potential damage that could be done by, you know, I think having those things in mind is important. I also think that like repositioning ourselves around collaboration. So like knowing yourself and then knowing how you can bring that value to serve others above all, like toward an end goal that is bigger than just, I want this to be done. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, I think if more of us thought about it in a collective manner, and tried to insert themselves even in the good work that's already happening versus like, I'm gonna launch blah blah blah, because that shit is hard and it's expensive, and you probably gonna quit, because what is it, 90% of people or more do quit. So chances are everybody, but there are people that need your skills, that need your heart, your value, whatever. So if we think about it in a collaborative manner, even with us in our business, like, not trying to create an event that another Black platform is doing, recreate it. Like, I want to create something that sits somewhere that is not already created, for example, or collaborate with another platform in a dope way. So yeah, collaboration, know yourself.
Love it.
That made me think of two things. First, and this is a question first, but do you feel like, so we started in Philly, right, for Who's Your Landlord? And in Philly, it's a city where I think many cities that aren't New York or LA, maybe San Francisco, suffer from this thing where if we're doing anything in real estate at all, right, and someone across town is starting something in real estate as well, that's
it's like a competitor.
It's like, wait, why are you doing that? They're already doing that. Like, so it's already solved for. Do you feel like I think a Hot 97 and Breakfast Club and stuff, right? Like, do you feel like healthy competition that way can be helpful in our community, or we're not ready for that yet in terms of like Black American society, right?
I think that we're not ready for that.
Okay.
But that does not mean that you don't compete. I think what that means is people have to, like, especially if you're putting up money and you're dedicating your time to like try to build something, you don't want to do it in vain, and you also don't want to do it in a way that makes it doubly hard to lift. And so just really being smart about assessing the entire landscape and being sure that you're providing value that is different, distinct from everyone else that's in the space. Like if I'm ever gonna compete, I'm gonna kill. And otherwise I don't want to compete. Otherwise I want to look for a way to add on, to build and to add on. And a lot of times I think even when two things appear to be competing, if you take a step back and you really assess what the output is and what they have to offer, you can find the bridges between the two, and you can find the ways that the two can become one. And that's like our mindset and our approach is we're never thinking about, we never think that someone else winning takes away from us. We're always looking at it like, oh, that is market validation. This is a good thing.
And the second thing I was going to say, to jump off of that, was just there was something nuanced that you said earlier. You mentioned how even the editorial like calendar and the editorial like map looks beautiful, right? Like it looks like how you envision. But I mean, like I can imagine just like even the organization of how you're thinking through it, how you present it to each other, to the team, right? And the reason why I point that out to the audience at home is just because, we're in a world, we talk about this often, it's like everyone's an entrepreneur, everyone's a creative. And so, like I said, I work not far from these guys at all. And like you have to really do it, right? Like you got to really live it. You got to, And if you do it, then you take note of those kind of things. You're like, yo, even our emails are thorough because we know that's how we just operate, right? Like, and we're unfortunately in a time right now, to your point, is just like where people walk into space and they want to be a creative. So I got a magazine coming out next year. I've just met mad people like that. You talk to them next year, it's like, yo, what's good?
Right.
And they're like, oh yeah, we still putting things together, but all the time, right? And it's like you gotta get dirty. Like it's hard. It's not easy. So
dive in.
Absolutely. So we're just
don't.
Or don't
Or don't.
and know
decide.
where you can help.
Right.
So we're excited. We're happy that you guys joined us today.
Very.
Thanks for having us.
Where can people find you guys? No problem.
We're at crownmag.com. That's CRWN mag.com. And then same thing, Crown Mag on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, Pinterest, all of the things.
Boom.
Yep.
There it is. Guys, thank you so much on behalf of Kelly and myself. That's Who's Your Landlord? Take Ownership podcast, all about taking ownership of your mental, your economics, and your community. Thank you, guys.